What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Ask Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy. If you haven't Googled me in a minute, take the time to look and find out what we're all about here, and that is electrical education. If you have questions about the National Electrical Code, you got a free platform, baby. Go to paulabernathy.com and you can submit your questions, and they'll be answered in an email, or guess what? They could be selected to be on an upcoming episode of Let's Ask Paul, kind of like tonight. So I want to say real quick up front, if you are really wanting to learn the National Electrical Code and you want to get a deep understanding of it and you're confused, then you want to check out our programs. Go to electricalcodeacademy.net. And of course, you could also go to the .com or .org. It doesn't matter. I usually get domains in all of those. And you can find more information on the National Electrical Code. Our current courses, we have the Black program, which is exam prep, and it's also what's used by a lot of companies just to get all of their folks up to date on the code. So that's called the Fast Tracks Black. Of course, we have the Red program, which is for residential. Again, that's post-licensing. So that's not what you would use for exam prep. And we got the Green program for commercial, goes all about commercial codes, things like that. Then we got the Blue program, which is industrial. Then we got the Purple, which is grounding and bonding. Then we got the Yellow, which is Electrical Theory 101. And of course, we have the Orange program, which gives you access to 4 of our main courses. And you get discounts on the other type courses. And we'll let you substitute any of the courses. For example, you might get the Orange program and you don't want the industrial course. That's fine. You can substitute that with the Purple grounding and bonding if you want. You just got to let us know at the time of purchase that you would like to substitute one of the courses. That's totally up to you. And you get access to them for 2 full years. So that's huge. 2 full years of access. Of course, you also get access to our Wednesday night sessions. If you want to check us out, join us live when we do Wednesday nights. Bring your questions, man. We love to have people join us on the Wednesday night. And yes, it is only available to those monthly subscribers and Fast Tracks students. So if you're just listening out on the web, or you're over on our YouTube or TikTok or whatever you're at, you're not going to get access to Wednesday night sessions, okay? You got to be a member to do that. But we look forward to you becoming a member, okay? Also, I want to give a shout out to Jay the Basement King Grunberg. We will be launching his Kicking It with the King this week. So excited about that. It's got some great shows coming up. So make sure you check out Kicking It with the King. It's going to be awesome. Gives you some insight into running a business, what he deals with in a day in and day out basis. And it might teach you something about running your business. Again, trials and tribulations that come up with when it comes to running your business and things like that. Jay's going to be very candid and share those things with you, and I think it'll be an awesome podcast. I look forward to it. Jay's a cool guy, and I think it'll be a great addition to Electrician Live Broadcast Network. So if you haven't checked that out, go to electricianlive.com, and you can get access to a lot of the podcasts and videos there. As well as where to look when you want to see some of our coffee hour live sessions. And we also have some coffee hours coming up that are going to be recorded that are lessons, which brings me to the next topic before we get into Let's Ask Paul tonight, is the plan that we have for a lot of our education moving forward. So we have decided, and I had this weekend to, decide what we were going to do. Brittany, put it before me. Is we're going to be doing something where any of the new videos, educational videos that come out that were generally designed for our monthly subscriber only, you're going to be able to watch these videos that come out for a specific amount of time. And I can't remember what it is, but it'll be like a certain time, like 24 hours or 48 hours. And then once that's over, then you won't be able to find this video again unless you are a monthly subscriber. Okay. And so if you want to catch it, and when we do this, we're starting to think that we need to make sure, because I'm starting to see where the electrical education is just dropping. I mean, I've spent the weekend looking at TikToks and things like that. And it still just amazes me the things that people will say on there that it really makes you cringe. So it obviously needs some more education out there. So we're going to do it, and we're going to try to make it available to you. And hopefully you want to get more of it. You'll subscribe to our subscription platform over on electricalcodeacademy.net, monthly subscription, $9.99 a month to get access to all those. But at the end of the day, we do want to be able to make certain things available to the public, at least for a limited amount of time, and then it's gone. So we'll be doing that. Okay, so look for that coming soon. Make sure you subscribe to all of our social media platforms. We'll announce that when it takes place. So that's exciting news, right? All right, so as always, on Let's Ask Paul at paulabernathy.com, that is where you can go to submit your questions. And we have some questions that have been submitted. Now, not necessarily I'll always pull a question from Ask Paul that gets submitted. Sometimes I'll pull it from our message board, our own The Sparky Hub, and things like that. So there's different times when I'll pull that together, and we will use that as a Q&A in one of these sessions. So, man, there's many ways that you can get questions to me. So remember that. All right, so this first question, let's kind of talk about it. It says, so here's the question. It says, so I have a question. So if I have a main panel for a house, then you want to feed a new panel in a garage, and I don't know whether this is a detached or attached garage at this point, just to a garage. It says, how many wires do you need? To which has a junction box for the new panel. Don't ask, not my job. Okay. So, but if it was your job, do you know how many conductors you need? We're going to talk about that today. It says, he goes on to say, which has a UFER in it. And so I'm assuming it's the panel that's the detached structures panel has a UFER, because if it was a detached garage, it would be required to have a grounding electrode system, unless it's just a single branch circuit going to it. And we have allowances in the code for that. But this seems like you're putting the panel there, so it's going to have a grounding electrode system. Okay. So anyway, we'll keep going. It says, which has a UFER in it. It says, to which feeds the panel in the new garage. So can you only run 3 wires to the junction box and 4 wires to the new panel and use the UFER as a grounding electrode bonding the J box and the new panel? Okay, so let me kind of, sometimes when you get questions like this, there's possibly a little piece that's missing. Now, when it comes to 4 conductors, okay, this is 2 hot conductors, a neutral conductor. Most of the time it's a neutral, but we know it's going to be a grounded conductor. It's not always a neutral, but it is always a grounded conductor. And then, of course, we have an equipment grounding conductor. So obviously you're feeding this panel, so you're going to have an overcurrent device at the start of that circuit. And so you're going to have an equipment ground. So I am not altogether sure what you're asking about the UFER, because if that's at the detached structure, we're talking about detached structure, then that is for lightning, transients, surges, things outside, things that are outside of the structure and trying to get things to earth. Also, it does stabilize voltage in the building and all this kind of stuff, but it is not to serve as an equipment ground. It is not going to help clear any overcurrent device, so it really shouldn't even come into the picture. If the detached garage, if it's not a detached garage, then I don't even know what we're talking about a UFER for, because you wouldn't need one in that new panel. It's inside the same building. It's just in an attached garage. So you just need 4 conductors, 2 hot, a neutral, and an equipment ground. If it's a detached structure, you have to establish the grounding electrode system at that detached structure. Okay. And if it's a UFER, then at that detached structure, you're going to run 4 conductors. You're going to isolate the neutral so it's not in contact with the cabinet, so that you're not violating 250.24A5. And I'll read that to you in a second. But then you want to have that equipment ground bonded to the enclosure. And so the UFER is going to actually go to the equipment ground terminal bus. Okay, it's not going to go to the neutral. That's over in the service. We're not in a service. We're in a remote distribution panel right now. Okay, and Jay likes to say, a subby, bruh. That's what he likes to say. So it's really important to keep these things separate. So the UFER, whether it's for the dwelling or the UFER that's for a detached structure, don't really bring that into the equation. Okay? All right. So for conductors. Now, I did quote to you 250.24a5. So I'm going to read it to you because I think it's, brings context to what we're doing. And what it is, it's talking about grounding of the service supplied alternating system. You have an A, which is the system grounding connection. Okay. And then it has an A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. Here's what A5 says. It says load side grounding connections. It says a grounded conductor shall not, okay, it's a pretty strong statement here, right? Shall not be connected to normally non-current carrying metal parts of equipment, and that would be the metal cabinets, right? So it says shall not be connected to normally non-current carrying metal parts of equipment, to equipment grounding conductors, or be reconnected to ground on the load side of the service disconnecting means, except as otherwise permitted in this article. Now, the only location that this is permitted in this article would be under 250.32. And under 250.32, you're looking at B, exception number 1, and that's when it was allowed to do this back prior to, I believe it's 95, or I might have my fives wrong. It could be prior to 2005. I can't remember because I'm a guy that doesn't live in the past. I continue to move forward, and we know that it's not permitted today. Now, since this whole this question is really new, because he says new panel. So the exception number 1 in 250.32b1 is not even going to come into play anyway. So we don't even have to waste any brain cells on that. So we have to have the 4 conductors, and we have to have that separation. Okay. And you're going to establish your grounding electrode system at the new panel in the new structure. Pretty simple. Again, if this garage is attached, then you're just running 4 conductors. Your structure already has the grounding electrode system established, hopefully, back at the main panel. It has nothing to do with the remote distribution panel, so it shouldn't have anything to do with it. Okay? So hopefully that answers that question. Still a great question because people sometimes get the grounding aspect mixed up, right? The grounded conductor, they get it mixed up with the equipment grounds. They get it mixed up with, when we use a term like ground, then we really don't know the context of how it's being used. That's why I harp all the time on being very specific, whether it's an equipment grounding conductor. I don't like acronyms when I'm grading students' work. I don't like when they say EGC, even though I know what it is, you know what it is. I want you to say equipment grounding conductor. I want you to say supply side bonding jumper. And funny thing, in the 2023, we will be getting rid of a lot of those acronyms, right? So bonding jumpers, somebody put in there that it should be BJ. Well, again, people chuckled at it, and I guess some committee was like, well, we better not have something called BJ. All the kids today will have a field day with that or whatever, and so they removed it. Okay, I'm like, shit, grow up. Whatever, So anyway, we don't call it BJ, okay? It's just a bonding jumper. So anyway, I guess woke culture is really starting to affect the NEC now, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so hopefully that answers your question. In the addressing whether or not you have to run 4 conductors, you absolutely do. Okay, just remember that UFOR has nothing to do with it. Don't even bring it into the equation. 4 conductors, 2 hots, a neutral, and an equipment ground. Boom, that's it. All right, good question. Thank you for submitting that question. The next question that we have submitted says, "Hi, Paul. Do you have any podcasts or videos on slash rated and straight rated breakers? Like when and where you would use them?" Great question. I do get this question from time to time because you'll have breakers that are straight 240 or straight breakers that are straight 480. And then you'll get breakers that are 120/240, right? Or the 120/208. Okay, so we want to be able to address those. So I do get that a lot, and I'm going to tell you where we're going to look at the code so that I can kind of give you some insight on what this slash ratings and where you would use them and when they might come into play. Okay, let's let me kind of start this out by talking about breakers here. So if I have a circuit breaker, and this circuit breaker has what we call a straight voltage rating, okay? So let's say it's a, I don't know, a 240 volt straight rating or 480 volt straight rating. What it says that it's permitted on a circuit where the nominal voltage between any two conductors, that be line to neutral or line to line, doesn't exceed the circuit breaker's voltage rating, okay? So, you know, if you're thinking about a straight rating and a straight rated breaker, so if I have a straight one that says 240, right? Then as long as the line to neutral or line to line doesn't exceed the straight rating of that breaker, then it's fine. Okay, so if it was a Y system, and let's say it was a 120 240 volt system, 120 208 volt system, but it was a straight rating of, let's say, 240, right? Then in that scenario, would I be okay? Absolutely, because I'm not exceeding the rating. 208 does not exceed the rating, okay? Perfectly fine. So that would be the maximum value that we would have, and that would be 240 volts, okay? So now if it's a delta system, let's say, and you've got a high leg to a neutral is 208 volts, or the line to line was 240 volts, then a straight voltage marked type of overcurrent device would be perfectly okay because you're not exceeding the 240. You with me? Okay. So that's important. So that's the first thing. And that would be any straight rated device like that would allow you to use up to the voltage rating. Okay. So 208 volts, it's perfectly okay on a 240 volt device. Okay. Not a problem with that so far. Now, what comes into play is the slash ratings. That's something that you have to start being very careful about when it comes to the slash ratings. So let's talk about that. So think of this now. If I have a 120 240 volt slash circuit breaker, okay? The slash means 120 is the first part of that. The 120, that's 120 to ground, okay? So 240 would be phase to phase, but the first part of that, the 120, that's a reference to ground. So that's one of the phases to ground. So if I was doing a solidly grounded 4-wire 3-phase 120 240 volt delta high leg system, which I'm familiar with, and I were to go in there and use a 120 240 volt slash rated breaker, the problem is the high leg on that would be 208 volts to ground. That's going to exceed the 120 volts line to ground voltage rating, and that would violate that breaker, right? You with me? So on a Y system, if it was the line to neutral was 120, okay, then I'm okay with that slash rated. That's fine because the line to neutral 120. And then line to line was 208. That's fine because that's on the other side of the slash. Remember, it's 120 240. Okay, so I would be okay. Any one of those phases to the neutral, it's going to be 120, right? And since we have what's called a neutral point, in that case, any one of those phases to the neutral point would still be 120. So that 120 slash 240 is fine. And even the phase to phases would only be 208. That's not going to exceed the 240. But what happens is if I use that slash device on a delta high leg, and I go from the high leg over to the neutral and vectorially, so the high leg to neutral, that's 208 volts. And that is to ground. So that would exceed the 120, and that would be a no-no. So most of the time, you're not going to run into this unless you're doing something with a delta high leg. But when you're using a slash rated, and it doesn't matter whether it's 120, 240, 277, 480, just be very cognizant of one of the phases to ground. Is it going to exceed that lower limit? Okay. Is it going to be higher than 277? Is it going to be again, 120, 240 volt delta with a 208 high leg? In that to ground measurement, that's going to be 208. Then that exceeds that 120. Now you say, but Paul, it doesn't exceed the 240. That's right, because the 240 is phased any phase to phase. Okay, so that first part of the slash is always to ground, and the second part is phase to phase. Okay, so hopefully you kind of remember that. And so any application that you'd be using, just be very aware of the breaker you're selecting. If it is a straight rated, and in all of these cases, you're not going to exceed 240 volts, and the system is, all the voltage is under 240 volts, then you're good. But if you go with the slash rating in one of the phases to ground, in this case, we give the example of the high leg, which would put it over 120 volts, that would be a problem, right? And it also obviously would be a problem using slash rated breakers on systems that don't match the voltage class. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. We don't even have to go into that, but you don't want to do that. Just because it clicks on and off, just because the switch is on and off, obviously you don't want to do that. We want to be very aware of the voltage class of each device we're utilizing. But just be aware of that. So if you're asking me when this might come into to play, you want to make sure you're very aware of what phase to ground. Is it going to exceed the first part of a slash rated breaker's value? Okay. And then you got to be very aware, is that going to take place, like we said, in a delta high leg? That would be a problem. Now, the only other aspect of this that I'll caution you about, if you have a corner grounded delta, you still need to look at the breaker you're using, because any one of those phases to ground, if it's a corner grounded delta, then it's a 480 on each of the phase, then that would be 480 to ground in some of those cases. So you got to make sure that the overcurrent devices can handle that. Straight, it's going to be fine as long as the voltage doesn't exceed whatever the rating is of the voltage of the breaker. But if you use a slash rated for that and you take any one of those to ground, and it could exceed the voltage to ground, so you probably want to steer away from a slash rated device when you're doing that. So that's just kind of a caution to be aware of that, especially if you're doing some corner grounded, which doesn't happen an awful lot, but these are just things that in your mind you want to be cautious of when you're selecting that overcurrent device, and you're not just grabbing one straight off the shelf. Now, in your career, you're probably going to deal mostly with 120, 240 volt breakers, 277, 480 volt breakers, or you're going to deal in a 480 straight, or you're going to deal in a 240 straight, and you're not going to have a problem. But dealing with corner grounded deltas, you got to be careful. But most importantly, dealing with delta high legs, you most definitely have to be careful if you're using a slash rated device. You're going to want to steer more towards a straight rated device. Okay. So hopefully that answers that question. That was a good question. I mean, I'm getting some good questions submitted this week. So there you go. What else do we got? All right. So this last one says, hey, Paul, my jurisdiction allows me to install non-metallic sheet cable inside of liquid tight outside. Is this a local thing, or is this code compliant? Okay, great question. Funny enough, I don't know if this question actually was sparked by some TikTok videos that I did. And oh, by the way, if you've never listened to me on TikTok or subscribed to that, it's 3-minute little videos. It's a challenge for me. You all know it's a challenge for me to try to get it out in 3 minutes. Check it out over on @MasterTheNEC. And by the way, all of my social medias, most all of them, it's @MasterTheNEC. So whether it's Twitter or it's TikTok or it's Instagram, most all of them are going to be the same. Keep it consistent, if you will. But we have a bunch of social media platforms. Check them out. All of them are a little different. Some really crazy questions that get asked over in the TikTok thing. And I don't post all of the comments there because some people are just totally whacked out of their mind. So it wouldn't do any good to have somebody post something and propagate ignorance. So I'm just not going to do it. But check it out. You might get something there. You might like that platform. Little 3-minute bam, bam, thank you, ma'am type of thing. But anyway, give it a check. All right, let me answer this question. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to systematically answer your question. And if anybody out there says that's a stupid question, I already know the answer to that, then you know what? You don't really need to listen any further. You can check out now. It's been great to have you on the podcast. Listen next time. But if you do care about this, then, hang out and I'll explain it. So the first thing we're going to look at is what determines a wet location. So let's do that first. So if you go to Article 100, and you look under locations, and you'll see wet. It says installations underground or in a concrete slab or masonry in direct contact with the earth. It says in locations subject to saturation with mortar or other liquids such as vehicle washing areas, and is unprotected locations exposed to the weather. Okay, so first thing I just like to educate while I'm doing it. Installations underground. It doesn't matter what the raceway. We're going to see that in a minute in 300.5, but they are considered wet locations. Okay, they're wet locations, and we're going to see where that is in a minute. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Any raceway that's in a concrete slab in direct contact with grade, it's a wet location. Now, the second floor concrete, that's not a wet location. Okay, but that is in contact with the grade. Is. Now, somebody says, well, isn't the concrete wet? Yeah, but it's going to cure and dry. And as long as you use a wiring method that's okay to be installed in concrete or listed for that application, then you're okay. What we're talking about, is it considered a wet location or not? And in our case, underground installations of all raceway types, don't matter how tight or sealed you think it is not. Or any raceway or wiring method that's in a concrete slab that actually is in contact with earth, is going to be what? It's going to be a wet location. So we got that out of the way. Of course, if you want to, at this moment, you want to look and see what constitutes a dry and damp location, hey, this is your time. Pause the podcast. Read them. You're already there, so you might as well read them, right? Okay, so the next thing let's address is, let's go to 300.5. So in your code book, we're going to talk about the underground aspect of this question. So 300.5, y'all are probably familiar with that. That talks about underground installations, and it goes into 300.5, the table minimum cover requirements for individual conductors like USC-2 or other cable assemblies and raceways that are placed in the ground. Okay, so when they are in the ground, kind of funny little notion here, but when they are in the ground, then they have to have minimum cover above them. Okay, now we're talking about 300.5b, which is wet locations. So check this out. Here's what it says. The interior of enclosures or raceways installed underground shall be considered to be a wet location, period. Period. Now, it also goes on to say that the insulated conductors and cables installed in these enclosures or raceways in underground installations shall comply with 310.10c. So that says that the conductors, for example, that are installed in the raceway in question, to be there, they have to be rated for wet location. So in other words, you couldn't just use straight THHN because that's not rated for wet location. But most manufacturers produce what's called a dual function, or not dual function, excuse me, a dual rated, hey, that's a better term, a dual rated conductor. That means it's THHN/THWN-2. So it does have the W, so it's a wet location. And if you go to 310.10c, you'll see THWN-2 listed there. So you get me? Of course, you could also put XHHW-2. That's also listed there in 310.10c. So anyway, all of that's there. So go check that out. 310.10 is amazing. Go look at it, and you'll get a lot from that. Okay, so we've established that underground portion. Now, what if I want to install that liquid tight or that raceway outside? What about raceways that are above grade? Because we're kind of building all this for this question. Well, go to 300.9. What does 300.9 say? Well, 300.9 says raceways in wet locations above grade. Now, remember, raceways. Liquid tight, flexible, non-metallic conduit, it's a raceway. Liquid tight, flexible, metallic conduit, it's a raceway. EMT is a raceway. PVC is a raceway. So some of these, EMT, it's a tubing, but it is still a raceway. LFMC is a conduit, but it is still a raceway. So when 300.9 says raceways, it reminds us, raceways in wet locations, and we already saw the definition of what a wet location is. It says above grade. It says where raceways are installed in wet locations above grade, it says the interior of these raceways shall be considered to be wet locations, period. And then, of course, the last sentence is exactly the same as we saw prior in the 300.5b, where it talks about making sure they're rated for that location, the wet location, under 310.10c, right? Okay, so all of this is letting us know that no, inside of a raceway, you can have non-metallic sheath cable, but we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, I'm building up. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to jump into 334. Now, 334, you're all familiar with that. That is the article for non-metallic sheathed cables, sometimes referred to as Romex. That's a brand from Southwire. We're all familiar with that. Maybe I'll do a show one time that talks about the history of that, because they didn't invent that, right? That isn't theirs. They bought that name. It started a long time ago, and it just kind of went from one hand to the next. And now I will imagine now they have taken it to new heights, but they didn't invent that. That name came from something else, right? So anyway, so we're at Article 334, non-metallic sheath cable. And there's uses permitted and there's uses not permitted. So the uses permitted is going to kind of give us locations that we can have non-metallic sheath cable and all that type of stuff. What we want to look at is uses not permitted, because we're trying to find out whether or not non-metallic sheath cable can be inside of a raceway, above ground or underground, outside. Well, it doesn't take you long to go to uses not permitted, which is .12, by the way. You go down to B, and you see B4. It's okay. You can pause the podcast if you want. Grab your code book. I love when you do that. That sounded like Trump there for a second, didn't it? Love when you do that. It's really big, really wild. We're going to win. We're going to win bigly. We are going to win, though. Okay, anyway. So number 4. That's my impression. It's the best I got. All right, number 4, so B4, so 334.12 B4 says in wet or damp locations. So you have to read the charging statement in B, and it says, titanium cables shall not, it's big words, shall not be used under the following conditions or in the following locations. So I can't use it under the following conditions or the following locations, and item number 4 says wet and damp locations. I cannot use NMB. There is no exception to that rule. Plus, I'm going to tell you a little skinny on NMB. Or I keep saying NMB because that's what we all produce. But it's really non-metallic sheath cable. The skinny on that is it's designed under UL 719. It says that NM is for dry locations only. That's what it's designed for. Not for wet, not for damp. The inner conductors are designed to be equivalent to THHN, but they're not necessarily THHN, and we don't mark them as such. So there's no markings on it. So it's not like you can strip them out and use them in the raceway by themselves. You can't do that because we don't put markings on the actual conductors, which you're required to do in the code. So we don't do that. So you can only do it while it's in the cable assembly. But anyway, and that's for a different debate. And again, we do debate that over on the TikTok. So if you want to check out my TikTok, go check out my TikTok. That's a crazy little platform, but it's growing. I ain't no lie. So anyway, that tells you that it can't be in there. So we've kind of covered it all the way from what a wet location was. Okay. So then we established what it was underground. It was a wet location. That above ground outside is a wet location. So we've already established that, right? So then we build ourselves up to, once we establish it's a wet location, then we built ourselves up to the product under the article, 334, and it clearly states that it can't be used in a wet or damp location. So we already established what we're talking about is a damp or wet location, but in this case, outside, it's a wet location. And it tells us specifically that inside of those raceways is to be treated like a wet location, right? Okay, so we've established all that. And then, of course, it culminates in 334.12b4 telling us that you can install it in a wet or damp location. And, you know, at the end of the day, the only thing you can do at this point is go, that's it. It just can't be done. So you can have opinions on, oh, it's okay, or this person allows it. The end of the day, the code doesn't allow it. If your jurisdiction wants to amend something to allow it, be careful, because typically the AHJ should not allow things that are less than the minimum standard. And that would be less than the minimum standard. So I can tell you right now, if you're using the non-metallic sheet cable for a company that I work for, and there's something happens and something goes bad, something goes stray or something happens, dude, I'm going to make sure they get you, because I don't want my product installed in a wet or damp location. I don't want it installed in raceways outside. None of that. I don't want it. Now, if you want to know whether or not you can install NM cable in a raceway inside of a building, then go check out my TikTok, because I got a great little 3-minute segment on that, and you'll get a kick out of it. And you might be surprised if you've never really worked with non-metallic sheet cable. Okay. All right. So hopefully that answers questions. I answered a couple tonight. Thanks for everybody for following me here on the Let's Ask Paul, and thanks for submitting your questions to paulabernathy.com. From time to time, I will be pulling questions now from our TikToks. I'll be pulling them from the Sparky Hub. I'll be pulling questions all over the place to be able to answer them on Ask Paul. And more importantly, I want you to be able to go to paulabernathy.com. I really want you to get your questions answered. If you've got a question and you're afraid to post it in a forum because people will jump on you, don't do it. Just go to mine and I will answer your question for you. You can agree to disagree, or you can learn something. That's totally up to you. I'm not a know-it-all, but I've been around a little bit, so I'm going to do my best to try to help you. Okay? It's just something that we want to give back to the industry, and that's why I created it. It consumes a lot of time, but I enjoy doing it and answering questions for folks. Okay? Plus, it gives us content so that we can do these awesome shows. So until next time, folks, I want to thank you for listening. Again, check us out over on paulabernathy.com. If you need some electrical training, or your company needs electrical training, check us out on electricalcodeacademy.net. And if you just want to get a fast access to the Fast Tracks Black program for exam prep, then just go to fasttracksystem.com, fasttracksystem.com, and you can go right to it, watch that demo, see what our courses have, and then you get to join us on Wednesday nights if you want. So hopefully we'll see you then, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Let's Ask Paul. Until next time, stay safe. God bless.